Hi all, Lasan Jong, the Democrat Killer. I'm back from a hiatus, and I'm going to continue my series of videos to try and, for lack of a better word, educate the general public as to the truth and the reality of what's going on, in my opinion. So, continuing on with part two of the China series, people look at China as a long-term threat to the U.S. And long-term threat period for the entire globe and humanity. The idea that the Chinese are going to be a long-term threat to us is kind of silly. As I said in the first part of the video, China will become a democracy before 2050 runs out. And I've explained the reasons why. But more importantly, China will never, ever be the most dominant economy in the world. This is different than being the largest. I agree with everybody. China will become the largest economy in the world by sheer fact that they have the population. So, given that the situation is based on a numerical superiority, there's nothing that we as Americans can really do about that. But dominance, no. The Chinese will never be able to get there. So what's the difference, first of all? Well, largest, biggest GDP in the entire world for one single country. The dominance is a different story. Dominance means that the power of the economic force and the power of a country drives the rest of the world, and the rest of the world has to follow the leadership of that one country. We Americans have been fortunate because we've been in that position for close to over 100 years, and we have dominated that position. We have been able to be in that position and dominate the rest of the world for one reason and one reason alone. We are the innovative country of the world. If you look at the past 120, 150 years, almost all of the major scientific technological revolution has come from the United States of America. Now, is that a coincidence? How is it that a country with, an agrarian society, even, backwardated versus the UK, gone from kind of a middling nothing to the most dominant economy in the world? And it's not like the US started with a massive population to select from. A lot of it was driven by legal immigrants that came to our country and produced second and third generation Americans that went on to greatness. The founder of IBM, I almost forgot his name, Thomas Watson, people like Hewlett and Packard, and eventually people like Elon Musk. And we have, other great innovators like, I hate to say it, but Zuckerberg, Jerry Yang, Steve Jobs, of course, Bill Gates. All these people have contributed to the dominance of the American economy in the world. So what is it about America that we keep producing these individuals? And why am I saying that by default the Chinese will not and cannot produce these people? Let me divert for a second here, because this is an important message that I want to get across. The economic dominance of the world does not depend on the average person in the country. Let me repeat that. The economic dominance of a country, or the economic performance of a country, is independent of the super vast majority of the people that reside in a particular country. In other words, test scores don't mean anything. Why am I saying that? Well, if you look at, for example, Korea, Japan, China, they all make fun of America. Oh, the big bad Americans, they think they're so great, but ha ha ha, look at their test scores. Isn't it awful? So what? If you have high test scores, all that means is that your population is being taught how to take those tests and how to be good at those tests. And honestly, have at it. Please keep continuing to do that. Keep continuing to produce high test scores, which will inhibit you from producing technological geniuses and innovators. Why? Well, let me first give you a very simple reminder of my background. I've been educated in 3 different continents, specifically and namely South Korea, the UK, Belgium, and the US. Now, you could say, because I went to the International School of Brussels, that the Belgian portion is, no different than the American portion. And if that's the case, I will accept that as a reason. But obviously, I've also been educated in the US. So I know the educational system of all 3 different areas. And I can say with absolute 100% certainty, we do not want to adopt the Asian educational system. Why? While they do produce high test scores, yes, there's no question about that. The reason why is because the kids are forced to memorize how to perform well on tests. And their whole entire educational system is based on rote memorization from day 1 to their PhD. Now, people are wondering, okay, so what? Well, when I was a junior high school kid in South Korea, I took, I believe it was 14 subjects per semester. No, you didn't mishear me. I didn't say 4. I said 14, okay, per semester. And all of the tests, I kid you not, all of the tests, without exception, was based on what was in the textbook and what the teacher taught. And what the teacher taught was in the textbook, i.e., so everything in the test was based on the textbook. And they would pick out random stuff from the textbook to test you on. And essentially, basically, that forced you to memorize everything in the goddamn textbook. I woke up at like 7:30 in the morning, went to school by around 8:30. School was officially from 9 to 3. We would then go through classes, and then after classes, we would go through after classes. And these were supposedly voluntary. No, far from it. They were not voluntary. And then a lot of the kids, myself being an exception, a lot of kids went to cram schools or academies, as they would be called. I had private tutoring because, guess what? We had a little bit more affluence than everybody else. And so I would get private tutors after school until about dinner time. And then after dinner, I'd be doing homework. And the homework, as you can imagine, for 14 classes is a whole hell of a lot. And so I would be up until probably 10, 11, sometimes 12 midnight or past. And during exam times, sleep was not something that you did because it was needed for your body. Sleep was applied to you because you didn't have a choice, meaning you're going to fall asleep anyway. And so, you sleep for 2 or 3 hours, wake up and study some more. in this kind of situation, and when I say study, I don't mean study like Americans. I mean study like memorize. You literally memorized everything. Lucky for me, because I spoke English, I had one less thing to memorize. But again, regardless, I did a lot of memorizing. And in that kind of situation, there is absolutely no room for independent thought. There's no room for innovative thinking, creative thinking, independent thinking, individualized thinking. And there's no such thing as an individual in societies like that. And when you get down to it, by the time you get to the end of junior high school and the beginning of senior high school, that's it. You're done. All the creativity is beating the hell out of you. I mean, sometimes literally. And there's no room for free thinking at all. And this is reinforced even more throughout the 3 years of high school. It is brutal in South Korea. And this is the same for Japan, and it is the same in China. So the vaunted and feared Japanese in the 1990s went where? They call the 1990s the lost decade for Japan. Why? Because they could not beat down their challenges coming up from the bottom like South Korea, and yet they could not challenge, forget the American dominance in technology, they couldn't even challenge the Europeans for technological innovation. And so they were kind of sandwiched, as they say, in between two economies, and they just got squashed. And to this day, the Japanese, they're kind of flatlining, and they can't do anything very much. And so under this kind of economy, it's brutal. It's really, really brutal. And so Korea is going through that kind of lost decade situation now. And I expect that the Chinese will get there in about 30 years. Maybe not, maybe 20 years, but something in that range. So why am I saying that? Well, the Chinese, the Korean, and the Japanese educational system is almost identical. It's all based on rote memorization. And the Chinese are incapable, therefore, of producing free-thinking, independent, innovative, creative minds. It just does not happen. It cannot happen because of their educational system. And they think they can all send their, strongest high school students to college here and get things to work. No. I told you, by the time you finish junior high school, you're already dead. Done. You can't think. You can no longer create. It took me an extraordinarily long time to kind of understand what the educational system is in the U.S. and adapt to it and change and finally, get around that, difficult mountain. And only because prior to the 2 or 3 years in Korea in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I was in a more free-thinking society, i.e. UK. That's the only reason why I was able to overcome it, because I had some experience in critical/analytical thinking. But for the others in Korea, China, and Japan that have grown up their entire lives under that system, they have no hope. They have no chance. So ultimately, China is going to undergo two massive blows. One, they will end up becoming a democracy. And two, they're going to go through the same exact economic pattern that Japan and which Korea then followed, and then finally China will follow. They will grow rapidly based on, stolen technology, mimicking, miniaturization, and, evolutionary growth. But once places like India, in particular, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia start catching up to the Chinese, and the Chinese cannot penetrate the technological barriers set down by Europe and the US, they'll basically flatline from there. And again, therefore, while they will be the largest economy in the world, it won't take much to get there, they probably will never, no, not probably, they will never become the most dominant economy in the world. This is why China is not a long-term threat to us. Are they a short to medium-term threat? Oh yes, absolutely. Potential for war in Taiwan, the dominance of the Asian waters, etc., etc., etc. But if the Chinese attempt to take Taiwan by force, they will be destroying that which they are after, which is the technology behind the Taiwanese chip making economy. Two, if they launch, and they would have to, a water-based invasion force, and depending on who the president of the United States is at the time, they could get their head handed to them. And the reason for that is because we obviously have a military tie with Taiwan, and if we exercise and choose to exercise that military tie, the Chinese will be destroyed in the water or on the water, or both. Why? Well, Chinese do not have a naval history, like zero or almost zero. And they haven't launched a fleet in probably 500 years. They know nothing of naval strategy, especially modern naval strategy. And I'm sure they've studied a lot of American naval tactics, especially during World War II and beyond. But studying something and having a living tradition passed down to you, no, huge difference. It's like saying, oh, I studied 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional chess, so I can be a grandmaster in chess. Unless you've practiced, decades upon decades, you're never going to be world chess champion. And even then, with that much studying, you still may not get there. But the Americans, we have a long history of naval warfare. And that, in some ways, has made it instinctual for certain parts of our leadership that then go on forth produce naval leaders who know, maybe not even know that they know, but have instinctive knowledge of how to fight a naval war. This gives us a huge advantage. And ergo, given also our superior technology, we don't need the numbers to beat the shit out of the Chinese in a naval engagement. And therefore, I think the Chinese will be very reticent to launch an invasion of Taiwan. But regardless, if they do, in my opinion, then they'll get their head handed to them. Even without our help, I think the Taiwanese are more than well prepared to take on the Chinese invasion force. So ultimately, while China will be threatening, I'm not sure that they are a true long-term threat to us. And they may not even be a medium threat to us. It may all be an illusion. And it might be the same thing that we went through with the Russian or Soviet missile crisis. Oh, they're outnumbering our missile fleet by so and so much. Yeah, a lot of good that did the Soviet Union. The point is that China, no, not a long-term threat. Maybe not even a medium-term threat. So who is? Well, in my book, it's the Indians. Now, most people will go, what? Is he out of his freaking mind? There he goes again. Well, I'm not sure that the Indians will make it there. And the reason why is because about 7% of the population in India go through the same educational system the Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese go through. But from a young age, there is a sliver of population, about 3 to 5%, and it's growing, so probably closer to 5%, of the population of India send their children from kindergarten all the way through high school and then send them to American or European colleges eventually, and they never experience the ridiculous, stupid educational system of the East Asians. And more or less, they are educated like Americans. And this, therefore, has the potential from that 5%. Now, think about it. 5% of 3 million people is 65 million people. That's the size of Great Britain. From that population, we could see another Alan Turing, or a Thomas Watson, or a Mark Zuckerberg, or a Steve Jobs, or a Bill Gates, or a Larry Ellison, whoever. This then could spark others, which then sets India on the pace to potentially, I'm not saying will, potentially challenge American economic hegemony. I'm not saying this is likely, I'm not saying this is possible. The Indians have a lot of things to overcome. First and foremost, they got to get rid of their stupid caste system. Holy cow, are you kidding me? Wow. Second, corruption. Ugh, so much corruption. The good news about corruption is that as the country gets wealthier, corruption tends to be reduced either by natural causes or through massive anti-corruption campaigns, but they tend to wither away with economic progress and enrichment of the general country. Third, they've got to get rid of their internecine battles between state and federal governments. Oh my God, it's beyond ridiculous. And for this, they need to look towards the US, because we've already gone through those internecine battles between state and federal governments, and we are now relatively, and I emphasize the word relatively, stabilized that relationship. Not all the time, not everywhere, but relatively speaking, almost everywhere. So the Indians need to look towards that. Fourth, India is not a culture of risk takers. They are way too conservative in general. And so they need to learn that risk culture. And they need to know the dichotomy of taking risk and making more, or not taking risk and making less. And they need to make that a cultural thing. Very important. Last and the most difficult obstacle for India to overcome will be the socialism aspect of their country, politics, and culture. If they don't get rid of socialism, there will be not enough reward mechanism for the innovators to cash in on. And therefore, it will discourage innovation in India. And that last point is the one that will end up destroying India if it does not get rid of that aspect of its culture, government, politics, and society. If India, and this is a big if, can overcome all those 5 factors, yeah, there's a potential, given that there's a sliver of, and when I say sliver, 65 million people who go through that kind of an educational system, the American educational system. Yes, there is a chance that India, not China, could be the long-term threat to the United States. And I'm talking 50 to 100 years from now. Now, what about America? Well, that's going to be about part 3 of my video on China. And while it will not be about China, it will be about how to fight against China and what we as Americans need to do to keep our long-term economic hegemony over the world. And this is going to be the most important lesson I can convey to say why we are at a crossroads and we are at a dangerous inflection point. And we need to make sure that we don't tip over that slippery slope, the pinnacle of that slippery slope, and just slide all the way down into the abyss. Because at this point, if certain factions in our country get their way, that's exactly where we'll be. And I'm not so sure that it's an accident, meaning I'm not so sure that they don't know what they're doing. I'm starting to get a feeling they know exactly what they're doing and why. And this is very, very worrisome for me. But that will be my part 3 video on China. I know this was a long video, so thank you very much for listening and watching. Please, if you like, post a like, and if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe to my videos. Thank you, and have a great day.